out that there's some issues there, so it ends up being that David became king. And then you see David's son Solomon become king. After Solomon became king, what happened is that right after he died, the Israel, the nation, they split, and so you had the northern kingdom Israel, the southern kingdom Judah. So we've been looking at the different kings and their reigns as it deals with the history of Israel, but it's not just simply the history of Israel, it's also the history of God and what God was doing to try to get Israel to pay attention and go back to following Him instead of following the false gods they wanted to follow. Well, we're in 2 Kings chapter 4. Elijah the prophet has come and gone. Now we are to the prophet Elisha. Prophets, remember, were representatives of God. And so God would reveal to them and they would share with the people, namely confronting sin and calling people back to follow the Lord. But not only that, but there was a care ministry that took place as well. Not a regular care ministry like you might see an Open Door Mission or something like that, but they did care for other people because God cares for other people. Here we see in chapter 4, we're only looking at the first couple. There's 4 events that happen here. We're looking at 2 of them. And in these events, you see faith at work, the rewards of faith. And in the rewards of faith, what we find is that God, as He blesses for the faith of the people, the faith of the individuals that are here, is that God cares and God takes care of people. It's a matter of faith. When you know what faith is, and if you don't know what faith is, you soon probably will experience it, because what you want maybe is at the store that you don't want to go down to, or maybe what people want for Christmas is not at the store, and so you go online. Now, when you go online to purchase something, what you might do is say, is this person credible? Because as soon as you give your information, payment information, it's an act of faith. You are trusting the other person to give to you after you have given to them. And I think that maybe once we have made the mistake of not very much. It wasn't very much, but not checking out and making sure, this person, they're pretty credible. Other people have said, yeah, this is a good person to buy from. So if you're not buying directly from a major company, if you're using something like Amazon or something like that, where they kind of are the third party, they're the go-between, and they're not necessarily the one providing the product, that sometimes there's people on there that will take you if you're not careful. So you want to watch that, but it's a matter of strict faith. You give them, you're sending them money, and you're hoping that within the next week or few days, you're getting something in return. And especially if it's going to cost very much, you might be paying real close attention and saying, well, I don't know if I want to spend that or not, or give that kind of information online that way. When that's what faith is completely trusting the other person. You can't do anything about it. You just say, here's the money, and you're trusting that the person is going to provide the merchandise that you have said you wanted to buy. Here, it's not quite the same, but the circumstance, but the faith is still there. The trust has to be in absolute trust, not something I can control, but just giving it over to God. And we see rewards for that. 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. You might remember that story, and verses 8 through 37, You might recall that story as well, having grown up in Sunday school. So as we look at these, let's have a word of prayer. Father, I thank you so much for your word. I ask your guidance. I pray that you will help grow our faith. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So here we are. There's a woman, and of the wives of the prophets, sons of the prophets, Josephus, he speculates that this is Obadiah's wife. There's nothing in the scriptures that indicates that. Is it a possibility? It's a possibility, but that nothing more than that. So, verse 1, continuing, of the sons of the prophets, those that were training to be prophets, she cried out to Elisha, said, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves." So there's the situation. It's a bad situation. It's a situation where here is a prophet, a person that was studying to be a prophet or was a prophet. Elisha is approached because Elisha is kind of the head prophet, if you want to think of him that way. He's the one that God primarily spoke to Israel through, but not exclusively. And in his work, you see that there were others that were studying to be people who were faithful to the Lord and studying to be prophets as well. They're called sons of prophets. So she's a woman whose husband had passed away. He was one of the sons of the prophets, and so she's looking for help. And so she goes to who else but Elisha. Maybe Elisha can help. Now it doesn't say here that she's necessarily looking for him to pay her debt, but she needs some advice. She needs something, because what's going to happen is that the debtors have called her debt, and so now she has to provide that money. Where's she going to get it from? Apparently her children were young because they were not supporting her. So in that culture, the support came from the husband. The wives, they made, if they made anything, they made very little. They weren't, they're not that they weren't industrious, but their primary care was for the home and the children. And so going out into the fields and collecting from the fields and doing all that, that was, that's a whole nother job. And to be able to do both, that was not what she was doing. And so she needed help. Where was she going to get money? There was no government assistance or anything to help that way. So she goes to Elisha and she says, "Look, I need help. In fact, my creditors, they're coming to take my 2 sons as slaves." Israel was not allowed to have slaves within Israel. That is, they could make slaves of the Gentiles if they conquered the Gentiles, and they could make slaves of them, but they could not of the Israelites. Of the Israelites, what they could do is they could have slaves that were debt slaves, not conquered slaves, but debt slaves. So if I owed you money and I had no way to pay it, you had every right to, you could say, hire me. Not really hiring, because the wage that I'm getting pretty much is going back to you, because that you need to be repaid for whatever debt I had accumulated. So you would provide for my food and shelter, but beyond that, anything extra, instead of coming to me for me to buy new clothes, went back to you in order to pay off my debt. So that helps give you the idea. So that is the situation that's here. And Elisha, he asks, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do I have? What do you have in the house?" So here you find a situation. When you're in a sticky situation, always go to God for help. God is the one who knows how to handle the situation. What do I do? What do I do about my bills? What do I do about, I'm not talking about the credit card bills that you accumulated because you decided that you needed 428 pairs of Crocs or anything like that, or that you needed a brand new wardrobe, or you decided to put 3 or 4 cars on your, I don't know what kind of limit you might have on your credit card, but it's not about, she was foolish with it, but there was debt that she owed and it needed to be cared for. And so what she did here is she said, Elisha, I need help, some way to help me. And so he says, what is it that you have? Tell me what's in your house. And she says, your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. It could be taken figuratively in the sense of, I really don't have much. I think maybe it's probably more on the literal side, that we don't really have beds, we don't have furniture, we don't really have much of anything. The only thing I have really is a jar of oil, which they would mix with the flour to make their bread. Or they would use it for lighting. But that was all that she owned that was really of any value to anyone. When we get in a sticky situation, always go to God for help. And in this, when you go to God for help, He may tell you to get to work. It's nice. When you read this, when we looked at Second Chronicles, when we were there, we saw how God, He just decided that in this battle that was going to take place, all Israel had to do was show up. All they had to do was show up and watch, as if it was a football game and they were a fan. Actually, now a cardboard cutout in the seat, but they were a fan watching the game. All they had to do was show up and cheer God on. We like when that's, because I think it's because we're lazy, and it's an easy answer. It's nice when, God, I've got this bill, this hospital bill that's come. What do I do about it? And all of a sudden a check from like some long lost relative or something shows up, and it's the exact amount so you can pay your bill. That's nice. And there wasn't any work to it. It was a simple fix. So we like when that happens, but that was not the situation here. What the situation here was, he says this in verse 3. He says, go borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. And when you come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons. Then pour it into all those vessels and set aside the full ones. So what they were to do, because go visit everybody's house, get as many, doesn't matter who, can I have a jar? Can I have a jar? Give me some, I'm trying to collect empty jars. I'll give them back. However the conversation may have gone, and she had to get as many jars as she could. How many people do you think she visited? Maybe 10, 20, 100? Do you think maybe she visited 100 people? I don't know. She, if it's more literal, and in the house there's really nothing but just a big jar right there of oil, then she has a lot of room in her house, however big it might be, but it's not furniture in the way, perhaps, we don't know. But she went and collected, they went and collected as much as they could. How many? We don't know. But they went in and they shut the door. When Elisha didn't tell her what was going to happen, did he? Did you notice that? Elisha just looked at her and said, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go to all your home, all the neighbors, grab all the empty jars, bring them home. And then you're going to fill them up. That was it. That was all the instruction that she was given. We have to realize that when God tells you to do something, just to do it. You don't have to understand how everything is supposed to play out. You don't have to understand, oh, I get it now, because then, no. When God tells you to do something, you don't ask, oh, does that mean this will be taken care of? if you get those unexpected bills and you pray over it and you're talking to folks and you sense God saying, maybe what needs to happen is get a part-time job, another part-time job somewhere. Whatever the case might be, that you say, okay, I guess that's what I should do. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to pay all your bills, but it's something. And how is God going to use that? Logically, to pay the bills. But for her sake, she wasn't really told this is what you're going to do, other than go get the oil. So she went and did it. You can see that she trusts what he says. She shows faith here. Elisha says to do something. I know he's a man of God. I know that God's got a plan, so I'm going to go do it. He wasn't a matter of, well, I don't know. It just seems like an awful lot of work. For what? What good is that going to do for me? She didn't go and say, well, yeah, but, then I'm going to have a house full of jars. What should I do with them then? All she did is just went and did it. It says here, verse 4, when you've come to your house, shut the door behind you and your sons, then pour into all those vessels and set aside the full ones. So, verse 5, she went in from him, shut the door behind her and her sons. Now, why is it that the door was to be shut? It's not really explained there. This miracle was for them. It was not for everybody else. I don't know, might speculate that she's out in her front yard and she's just, people are watching her do this and saying, well, hey, I've got a jar I want filled too. And so they bring their jars. And if everybody's bringing their jars and having their oil filled, guess what they don't need at home? Oil, right? So when the command is to go and sell the oil, there wouldn't be any work. So I don't know if that's why that he said you need to shut the door and do this. But it's the way that God worked in this situation. So they went in and she poured the vessel out. So she took her jar of oil and she's pouring. Now, I know that if I have a jar of something, I was going to say a jar of peanut butter, but that's not going to work. If I have a jar of some kind of lemonade or something like that, we have mason jars at home. Does anybody else do this? We have some mason jars at home, and we use those for like drinking, or storage for short term in the refrigerator. We don't can or jar or anything. We just sometimes that Dawn had some of those around, and so we use them for that. If I take that lemonade and I pour from this container into that container, then the lemonade is where? It's in that container, right? Because this one I poured it out of and it's gone. So she takes the oil and she pours it into that container. And maybe she sets it up right because this one's full, and so she sets it aside. So now where's the oil, right? It's in this one still. Because God kept delivering the oil for this widow. So she goes jar after jar after jar. Let's just say she had 20 jars. I think that's probably, I don't know how generous that would be in that day, if she would collect her 20 jars, but from one jar of oil to get 20 jars. When God tells you to do something, you just do it. And she did it. And she saw God's hand at work. And as a result, after she had done this, what we find is she goes back to Elisha. And she says this, it came to pass, the vessels were full. She said to her son, bring me another. He says, there's not another vessel. And so the oil ceased. Then she came and told the man of God and said, go sell the oil. She says, look, this is what happened. And so he says, sell that oil, pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest. Now, in my mind, I imagine that it was until they got old enough and were making a career and able to support her, as opposed to, just live and take it easy because, now life is good. She had enough. We don't know how much the debt was. It was enough that the debtor, the collector, didn't want to say, it's $20, don't worry about it. It was enough that he said, look, you owe us for the house. You owe us $10,000 still for the house. I can't just forgive that. I've got to make a living too. And so, look, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to use your sons as slaves. So we're making up the number, 10,000. So she had enough oil there to go and give that, whether it's $1,000 or $10,000 or however much debt they owed, to sell that oil to make enough to pay the debtors and then have enough for really what probably would be years worth of oil. That's amazing to me that maybe they had another 5 years of oil there. Well, I tell you what, you'd be pretty generous if you need it. Don't worry, light another candle. We got lots of oil. I don't know. But you see that God rewarded her faith. Elisha didn't say how this was going to turn out. He just said, look, you go sell this, you go fill the jars. One of the punishments that I've heard that, I don't know that we ever really did this, but one of the punishments I've heard that you can do to children is you can have a stack of bricks. And then when they get in trouble, all you do is say, I want that stack of bricks there, one at a time over there. And just let them go and, take a long time to do that. Just gives them time to think about and dislike that activity, so that way they'll think twice before they do it again. This might have seemed like one of those fruitless activities that you do, to fill these oil jars up. I don't know that she had in mind what God had intended, because she goes back to Elisha and says, okay, now what? I did that, now what? But her faith was rewarded. She was willing to go do the work by faith, and as a result of her work by faith, God provided for her, not only for her debt, but to care for her, and in my mind, until at least the kids were old enough to support her. That is God's rewarding for faith. God rewards our faith when we do what God tells us to do without any question. When God tells you, just do it. God, He also rewards the generous. He also rewards generously. When God tells you to do something, just do it. We come here to verse 8 and we see another story here of faith. Here we find in Shunem, this would have been a little farther north from Jerusalem. It would be farther north in Israel. If you eyeball it, it seems like about 20 miles from Mount Carmel, which is up towards that direction as well. Elisha, he would go through this town of Shunem in his travels, and as he would go, a notable woman, she was a woman that probably of influence, probably not poor, and she's married, we find out. She's not a widow, she's married. And so she is a notable woman, or a great woman, and she constrained him. She says, look, now you're coming through town. What I want you to do is I want you to stop and stay at my house so that way we can provide for you. Well, you're the prophet, you're coming through. Why don't you come to my house? Come to my house, we'll feed you, we'll let you spend the night before you go on your journey. We'll save you some hotel money, if you want to think of it that way. So she was generous, and when he'd come, she would do this. On verse 9, he says, she says to her husband, here's a holy man of God who passes by regularly. Let us make a small upper room on the wall, and let us put a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand, so it will be whenever he comes to us, he will turn in there. Let's make a small apartment. We're going to turn our garage into an apartment, or a basement into the apartment, or whatever the case might be. That as he's coming, that he doesn't even he could just go right in there. This is the beginning of traditionally what's called a prophet's chamber. If you've heard of that, usually a small little room with a cot, just a place where sometimes you have missionaries or pastors that are coming through, and they could stay right there that way. Yeah. Sometimes people do that, change their basement into something like that. So that way, kind of like our missionary house, if somebody's passing through and say, yeah, sure, come on in. Here, we see that God rewards generosity here. She decides that this is what they should do, talks to her husband. Her husband isn't in the story much. She's the one, maybe because he's out in the fields working. You find this in the story. But he's working in the fields, and so she's managing the home, and she says to her husband who's coming from the field, by the way, we have Elisha here. And it's like, oh, good, but whatever. Or possibly, remember, the culture that they're in is very idolatrous. Everyone is following after other gods. So it possibly could be that he really didn't care about Elisha. He didn't have any concern spiritually or just compassionately on him, but she did. We don't know what the case might be. He allowed the prophet's chamber to be made there. He said, when this happens, it happened, verse 11, that one day Elisha had come there, and he turned into the upper room and lay down there. And while he's up there, he says to his servant, he had a servant, a runner, a gopher. There you go. He had a gopher. Go for this, go for that. He had a gopher with him. Gehazi was his name. Gehazi, his servant. And he says, call the Shunammite woman. She's done this, and she's been generous to us. Find out what she would like. Does she want us to talk to the city leaders? What is there some favor we can be doing for her? She showed her generosity to us. How can we show our generosity back to her? So he goes, and the servant goes and says, she responds and says, look, I've got everything that I need. Let's look here, verse 13. Elisha tells the servant, say to her, look, you've been concerned for us with all this care. What can we do for you? Do you want me to speak on behalf of the king or commander of the army? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. Which doesn't really make any sense, does it? She is comfortable where she's at. She doesn't need anything. I assume financially they're comfortable. They were able to put an addition onto their house. I assume that in the community that she is a notable person, that she's respected. Not necessarily in a sense of like a royalty or something like that, but just a respectable person. And she happy where they're at. They don't need to move or anything. So he said, what then is it to be done for her? Elisha asked the servant, and the servant responds, actually, she has no son, and her husband is old. Isn't that great? The only thing at this point about her husband is that he's old. What a fantastic thing to be put forever in God's Word, is that their husband was old. The culture is the Eastern culture. It's it's not quite as weird to have a larger age gap. Did anybody, when President Trump was running for president the first time, did any of you maybe in your mind say, oh man, his wife, man, she is really young. I talk about robbing the cradle. Did you look and think that way? I didn't. He's, I believe he's 74 and she is 50. Holy cow, did you know that? That's quite a difference. Now maybe you're saying, whoa, man, that's kind of unusual. In our culture, usually you marry about the same age. But in their culture, you wouldn't necessarily do that for a variety of reasons. For whatever reason, they were still able to have kids, but she was physically barren. She was not able to have kids. And she says, my husband is old. I don't know if the concern is at one point he's going to die, and then, I'll be like the widow that was before, and I won't have anybody to take care of me. Or if she's looking and saying, look, my husband's old, but our family line is going to die if we don't have children. Whatever the case might be. Also in this, a woman who did not have a child was thought to be cursed by God. So you can see why she might want this. What I find here is that the servant doesn't say that she said that. I wonder if the servant said, look, she doesn't need anything. But I noticed that she doesn't have a son. I don't know if that was the case. So Elisha, he tells the servant to call her, and when she comes in the door, he says, about this time next year you will embrace a son. And her response in verse 16 is, no, my Lord, man of God. He's called man of God. She recognizes that this is, this is not just some false prophet. This is a man who follows and who shares God's word. Do not lie to your maidservant. Don't get my hopes up. God rewards generosity. As she was showing generosity to him, as she was showing generosity to help, to just care for a man who needed the help, the assistance, that could use the room and the board. So as she saw that and said, look, here's a man of God, I want to provide for him, God rewards your generosity. And he does here so by providing a son. It turns out that a year later, sure enough, she gets pregnant and she has a baby. Some time has gone by, obviously, because the kid, the young son now, is out with the reapers. He's out in the fields with the reapers. Then as he's out there with the reapers, all of a sudden, whatever happens, he says, my head, my head. And so the dad does what every good dad does, go see your mom. So he was caring, but they were amongst the reapers, so they're doing the fields, and mom is at home, can care for him while he's doing the fields. What else is the dad going to do? So I don't think he was not caring, but I think he's, the best person for the job right now is mom, which is always true when somebody's hurt, right? So he has a servant take the kid, and the child, for whatever reason, they get knocked in the head, a concussion, or sunstroke. What was it? We don't know. But she stayed with him, and about noon then he ends up dying. That's a great story, isn't it? Hey, remember now that Elisha said, about this time you're going to have hold the baby. But she responded, look, don't disappoint me in this. What she does is she knows exactly what to do. she takes the child and goes and puts the child on the prophet's bed. Where did the child come from? The child came from God, right? And so as a result, she knew that if God gave the child, God could return the child as well. So she says to her husband, look, hitch me up some horses. It's not what she says, but it's the idea of hitch me up some horses. I want to go see the man of God. And he asks, is everything fine? And she says, yeah, everything's good. Because he says, well, this is kind of unusual. It's not some sort of Sabbath or a new moon festival. There's not a particular reason to see him. If you told your husband or wife, I'm going to go to church today, and it's in the middle of, it's like a Thursday or Tuesday when we don't have church, it's, well, what are you going to go there for? And so anyway, he asked, what's the deal? And he asked, is the child? And she said, oh, don't worry about it. He's good. She didn't tell him that the child had died. She just says, it is well. So they went, and she tells the servant, she says, drive and go forward. Do not slacken the pace for me unless I tell you. So they went, and they put her on turbo boost and went all the way to Mount Carmel. And when they get there, Elisha sees them from a distance. I don't know. Those people back there, they had to have really good eyesight, I think. Sometimes you see somebody in the store, clear across the store, and you might look and say, is that somebody I know? Veronica and I were in Xander with the store, and we split up, and Veronica and I were in the front of the store. We're waiting for Xander, and I looked down, clear across the store, because we're up by the registers, and clear down the aisle. And I said, well, I think that's him. And then I said, well, I don't know. Is that his jacket? That's all the farther. I mean, it didn't take 10 seconds for him to walk up to us, but these people, they recognize people from long ways off. I don't know how. But he says, go, it says to his servant, go find out if everything's good. Well, why is she coming to see me? So go find out if everything's good. So the servant goes to find out if everything is good. And she says what to him? Well, she says in verse 26, the question is asked, is it well with you, with your husband? Is the child well? And she answered, it is well. That's the second time. So do you know what I learned from this passage? Anytime a woman tells you, oh, it's okay, don't believe her. She's lying. If she says, oh, everything's good, she's lying. It's not true. It must be something really bad if she says that. It's not really what I believe, but it's a lesson to learn here. Verse 27. She decided that she had to go to Elisha herself. It wasn't good enough to go through the servant. The servant didn't have the answer anyway. It was Elisha. So she went to Elisha, and it says that she caught him by the foot. It's different in our culture, but if it helps you think, you kind of get in the mindset, go up. Well, don't really do this, but in your mind do this. You see a couple walking, and as a guy, you go up and just grab the arm of the woman, not meanly, but just grab the arm of the woman and see what the guy does. Okay, you won't have long to see what he does before you feel what he does, I'm sure. Here, it kind of might give you an idea of what's taken place. She has grabbed hold of his feet, and it's like, what are you doing? Get off him. The servant is behaving that way. And Elisha says, look, leave her alone. Obviously, she's distressed. God hasn't revealed it to me, but obviously she's distressed. So in order for her to grab his feet, obviously she is bent down before him as a matter of humiliation or respect, not as a matter of worship. And she's got a hold of his feet, and she's desperate. And Elisha knows it, but he doesn't know why. Sometimes the prophets would be told why somebody was coming. So they, I don't know if God was just preparing them for it or what. But she grabs hold of him, and she says this. Verse 27, she came, grabbed hold of him, caught him by the feet. The servant pushed her away, and Elisha says, "Leave her alone. Her soul is in deep distress. The Lord's hidden it from me and has not told me." And she said, Did I ask a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? She doesn't say what the problem is, but it comes pretty clear what has taken place, at least as it's recorded. Something bad has happened to the child. So Elisha says, "Here, take my staff," to his servant, "and go lay the staff on the child." And then, so the servant, he travels all that way. It doesn't do anything for the child. So then he comes back and he reports to Elisha and to the woman, "Look, that didn't do anything." So now Elisha has to go down and do this. We don't know exactly why this part takes place. I wonder if God is either showing that, look, sticks and stones do not have power within themselves. Remember, they were living in a culture where statues of rock or stone of stone or wood, they would ask them for favors. They would ask, worship these false gods. If the point was, look, a stick is not good enough, or if it is say that the servant was not the one that was called by God, but rather was Elisha, we're not really told what the issue is. But Elisha, he goes into the child, and you might recall the strange story. He goes in and he lays headlong onto the child. Talk about an uncomfortable situation. If the child was faking, this would have woke him. He would have moved right away. Elisha is laying on him, mouth to mouth, face to face, all the way down, and just laying on him that way. And for whatever reason, God directed him that way. And it says his body became warm. Don't know why or how. It was miraculous, obviously, but what was going on? And then Elisha gets up and he walks in the house again, probably in prayer. And then he goes back up into the room and he stretches himself over the child again. And then the child actually starts sneezes 7 times. Here is a miracle that's taken place. What we find is that not only God rewards generously, but faith trusts God when you're helpless. For the woman, the widow that had the oil, she wasn't 100% helpless in the fact that God used a very little bit that she had in order to produce the result at the end. This woman, though, she had nothing. She didn't have anything, but she had a body, but she couldn't produce a child. But God touched her body and produced a child. When it came to this, the situation where her child was dead, it wasn't like she gave the kid mouth to mouth or beating on his chest or anything like that and came back to life. No, there was nothing that could be done. The one widow, she didn't know what she could do in this situation. She needed the advice. She needed to know what to do in order to prevent her sons going into slavery for this debt. This woman, though, she's married. This woman, she didn't know what to do, or she knew what to do, but she didn't. She couldn't do anything of herself, but she knew where to go. That's why. Perhaps it might have been by the faith that she said, everything's fine, because she knew everything was going to be fine? I don't know. But she goes and she says, look, Elisha, I told you not to cheat me in this. If I'm going to have a son, let me have a son. So he goes, and God works through him, and this child, she is able to grab her, pick him up in her arms, and you can just imagine the hugs and kisses she gave all over that little child, so happy that he was back to life. See, she trusted God. There's nothing for her to do, so she trusted God. Look, faith is when we trust God. We don't know what the end result is. We don't know how it's going to play out. And sometimes we think that we must not have had enough faith because something tragic happened. That's not necessarily true. The question is, are you actually trusting God to do what He says is best? Because what He says is best isn't necessarily what you like, but it is what's best. The kind of faith that we need to have is the same kind of faith that these ones had. There is a situation, a bad situation, God, help me out. Or a situation where you're absolutely helpless, God, you're the one I need to turn to. Whether it is, as the first story, it is for some kind of advice, tell me what to do. Or in the second one, I know God's, there's nothing I can do, but I know God can take care of the situation. It's a matter of trust. We don't see ourselves doing this, would we? I mean, if you were that first one, that widow, and you looked and said, this is all I've got, would you just say, well, I guess that's it? I give up? I guess my sons are going to have to go into debt or go into slavery? Is that what we would probably, I think that probably is. Would we be like the woman who their son died and we'd be like, well, I guess that's the end of that? She knew this was a special child. It was a special gift to her. And so that's why she went and said, look, you gave me this gift to take it away. What are you doing? And so Elisha goes and you see the child raised from the dead. God knows what He's doing. God wants us to trust Him wholeheartedly. But I think so often that we're used to, the fact that life is hard and there's bad things that happen, that sometimes we don't trust God to help us in our hard situations. When you're in a hard situation, you need to go to God first and look for Him to give you an answer. The answer may be, you need to get a second job. Or the answer may be, stand back. I got this taken care of for you. God shows through circumstances. God shows through God's people. God shows through His Spirit in you and through His Word. But you've got to trust God. Because I think so often that we trust God only insofar as we can see Him. We go online and we're going to buy something. Why would I trust that person? I go and ask, is this a reputable company? Or, if it's like an Amazon kind of thing, how many people have bought from this person and what are they saying about this person? Does he have a good reputation, or she, a good reputation for doing what they say they're going to do? They got maybe 4 or 5 stars on there. You can see how many people have gone, ordered from them. That's not, blind faith. That's saying, these people are trustworthy. Well, is God trustworthy? He's got, all kinds of likes, stars. Everybody's giving him 5 stars except for one. Satan, he's trying to mess up the curve there or something like that. But, you can trust God. If you know you can trust God, that when you get in your situations, you're not sure what to do, then trust God, because you know He's trustworthy. Allow Him to be the one that gives you the wisdom that you need, the answer that you need. I mentioned this morning about fear. What is the opposite of fear? Well, it's not joy, it's faith. It's trust in God. Now, it doesn't mean you're never going to fear, but in your fear, you're going to turn to God and say, God, this is my situation. I don't know what to do. And you are going to allow Him to reveal His will. Maybe over time. Notice with the widow, go fill these jars. Okay, I did that. Now what? It took a little bit of time. But with the Shunammite woman, it was kind of the same way as well. The servant went and came back and said it didn't work. Well, does that mean this is no good? No, she didn't give up. Elisha went down, and the son was raised. God is good. He loves us. He'll care for us. You can put all your trust in Him because He cares for you. He's one that is your perfect plan in mind. So when you're looking at what should I do in life, ask Him. When you're looking at, how do I handle the situation with the virus? You trust Him. When you look and say, I've got, fears about my finances, fears about my spiritual life, whatever your fears might be, look, trust Him. He'll take care of you. He's trustworthy. And when you see Him do His work, make sure you go back and give Him a 5-star rating. Tell other people, hey, you know what God's done for me? And help them to see who God is as well. Father, I thank You so much for what You've done. For the record here of what You've done through Elisha, the lessons of faith, I pray that You will help us to trust You. I ask, Father, that even as these ones saw that You were the answer, not other people, not false gods, but only You, I pray that You will help us to be a testimony to show others that it is by Your grace that You have shown Your goodness to us, that You provided for us, that You have protected us. I ask You continue to bless us, continue to protect us. Thank You for each one that's here. I ask Your blessing upon each one.